All right.
We're taking all the best old school wisdom and blending it with the top new school methods to bring you the optimal coaching strategies. This is the 80-20 Baseball Podcast with Coach Bo.
Welcome, baseball coaches. Coach Bo here with you. Always great to be here. Our weekly get-together where we go from new coaches to good coaches or from good coaches to great coaches. Coming out with a new episode every Tuesday. The next 3 episodes are going to be a little shorter than normal, followed by what I think is going to be a phenomenal interview that I'm going to record next week with a longtime friend of mine, Lamar. He's currently an athletic director. He also doubles as a coach. He has coached a wide variety of sports and a wide variety of youth ages. And he's a guy that works with some of the most challenging youth around. He works inner city. In fact, I worked alongside of him a long time ago, and it was well known that if you could be successful with the kids at the school he is at and the school I was at, you could be successful there. You could be a coach or a teacher anywhere. So my good friend Lamar and I will record an episode, and he is full of wisdom that he wants to pass along to all you coaches that, like I said a second ago, want to go from being a newer coach to a good coach as quickly as possible, or from a good coach to a great coach as quickly and as efficiently as possible. Now, while the interview will be recorded next week, I'll probably roll it out a few weeks after that. Also, I got into contact with a strength and conditioning coach back in the Midwest, works with youth players, has a phenomenal message, a lot of tips and strategies for parents, youth coaches to use with their youth players, their youth baseball players, to get them faster, stronger, quicker, more athletic, especially this time of year as we move into more what's considered the off season. And that interview is slated to come out in September. This podcast is a mix of me essentially curating and also creating organically a lot of great baseball information, strategies, tips, methods, along with what I consider some really high quality interviewees. And we'll keep that rolling. It seems to be a really good format. I love getting emails from all of you. I got an email this past week from a listener, lives out in San Luis Obispo, California, Central Coast. You know who you are. Beautiful area out there. Some good baseball out there. So the listener emailed me, among other things, mentioned something along the lines of trying to get the other coaches to buy in to some of the things that he would like to do or wants to do with the team and the players. Now, this is something that most coaches experience in year one to some degree or another. And definitely if you coach more than 2 or 3 years, you will experience this, where you may find it a challenge to get the other coaches on the same page or to buy into some of the things that you'd like to do, whether it's at practice or in the games, a methodology, a strategy that you'd like to implement or coach up with the players. And this is understandable. I think this goes on everywhere in society, in every job, occupation, and really area of life. With that said, the best course of action, at least initially, in my opinion, is to find an area of the game that the other coaches aren't that interested in coaching or don't know much about. Maybe they haven't brought it up a lot at practice. And if you feel comfortable and ready, coach that area up. Request to coach up the players, the team in that area in an attempt to build some credibility and to show evidence that your strategies, methods, can be and are successful. So about 10 years ago, I was coaching a 10U team. I was helping out. I would go out to the practices. I wouldn't plan the practices. And in fact, I wouldn't run most of the practices because the 2 dads that were running it, even though they had no college baseball experience, no professional baseball experience, and no coaching experience outside of coaching their own kids the previous years, which is still coaching experience, of course. But when I came in to help, they knew my resume. Yet the first 5 suggestions that I made over the course of the first couple weeks fell on deaf ears. In one ear, out the other. In fact, a couple of them, they just went right into trying to tell me how they had a better way of doing it without trying it, without having ever tried it, or even explaining with good reason why their way of doing it was better. And I didn't get into an argument with them. I didn't butt heads with them. I just said, okay, it's your team. Now, in the back of my mind, I thought it was quite interesting. But nevertheless, this is what led me down the path that helped me stumble on this strategy that has worked many a times now since that time I first tried it 10 years ago. And that is find an area that the other coaches don't really want to coach up, an area they don't coach up much in practice. So get away from their comfort zone, get out of those areas that they perceive themselves to be very knowledgeable about, and get to an area that they don't coach up And after the third practice, I mentioned a couple strategies, tips to running a better ground ball drill, infield drills, ground ball drills. And there were some huge flaws as I saw it with their drills. They were leaving a lot of quality reps on the table. They were wasting a ton of time, very inefficient. They were repping ground balls and plays that happened once or twice a season. And they were repping these plays as much as any of the other stuff. But I noticed they were not coaching their first baseman at all. They were focused on hitting ground balls, focused on the shortstops, second baseman, third baseman, but they didn't give any attention to the first baseman. So I went home after the third practice, and my first thought was, how can I help add value? How can I help this team, this coaching staff that doesn't really want to be helped? But then I thought to myself, well, maybe I'll avoid stepping on their toes. And I thought, well, their toes are nowhere near first base. So if I'm coaching up first base, that's not stepping on their toes. I've seen 3 practices. Each practice was 2 hours. I've seen 6 hours of them coaching. They haven't said one word to the first baseman. So I wrote down my list of the 3 things their group of first basemen collectively could do better that would have a big impact on the success of their defense and preventing runs. And at the next practice, right before they started the infield drill, I said, hey, can I help go coach up the first baseman? Would that be okay? And they said, yeah. And so I went over to first base and I coached up the first baseman for the next 2 practices, really focused heavily on them during the scrimmages, during the ground ball and infield drills. And a few weeks later, I show up to practice and the manager starts telling me how much better the first basemen have been playing recently. They had a doubleheader that weekend, and the first basemen were markedly better. They were doing things that he had heard me coach them up on, and they were saving more bad throws. They were making better plays. They were positioned better. Their setup positions were more athletic. They had more range, not just on ground balls, but around the bag. So fast forward to the next week, I get to practice, and I mentioned how the ground ball drill they liked could be adjusted a little bit and therefore could add a lot of quality reps with just a few tweaks, and they did it. And from there, I had a lot more credibility. I had evidence that what I was coaching worked. And from there on out, they were much more open to what I had to share with them. Now, with that said, I did mention to test out how willing and how open-minded they were after seeing the success of the first baseman. I threw out a couple tips about the ground ball drill, and they did make those adjustments right away. But I was careful not to dive in head first into that fully into their area. I stayed out and I actually looked for another area that they weren't coaching up, and that was outfield relay throws. And so I had a drill ready to go for that. I asked them if we could do an outfield relay drill. It would only take about 12 minutes, 15 minutes, and it would get a ton of reps for all the outfielders and the middle infielders and also the catcher and third baseman. The drill was great. It was rather eye-opening for them as to how efficient and effective a drill could be run. And that opened up other doors and other opportunities to coach up the team. So I have found this is the best way as an assistant coach to get buy-in from the manager, the other coaches on the staff, especially if they're tight-knit with the manager. I have found this to be the best course of action. Show them that you can coach up the players, certain positions, certain areas of the game really well, rather than tell them. So show them rather than tell them. Get that evidence and go from there. And sometimes if they see you running a drill or how you communicate a skill, that in and of itself will open their mind to the fact that you know what you're talking about. It doesn't always have to be like 3 weeks later after they've had some successful tournaments. For example, that outfield drill that I put in, they saw right away. They go, well, this is way better than our outfield drill in terms of efficiency, game-like, the competition component, how everybody was involved, etc. All right, shifting gears here a little, but somewhat on the topic of getting buy-in as a coach. Here's a coach that if he walked on to any field would probably not have to explain his case as to why he's going to go about doing something a certain way with the team. Coach Skip Bertman, legendary coach Skip Bertman, an all-time great baseball coach. So Skip Bertman, 86 years young as we speak, out of Detroit, Michigan, coached at Miami Beach High School, coached at Miami University as an assistant, and then at LSU, won 5 College World Series. He's a legend. And I came across an article where he was asked about technology. And when asked the question, is technology helping or hurting the game of baseball? He gave this answer, quote, "The technology is fine by me, but any successful team has to do the basic stuff," end quote. So he didn't dismiss technology. He said technology is fine by me, but any successful team has to do the basic stuff. And we can infer from that, he means do the basic stuff well, do the fundamentals well, be good at the fundamentals. And I thought of some examples in today's game of this. Legendary coach Bertman wouldn't care what the spin rate is on a pitch if that pitcher couldn't hit the broadside of a barn from 30 feet away. He wouldn't care what the spin rate is on any of the pitches if you went all nuke lelouch. Coaches, we shouldn't care how hard a player hits a ball off a tee or off a soft toss, or even in batting practice, how hard their exit velocity is on Tuesday at practice when they can't make contact in the game because their swing decisions are so poor or their timing is way off. Another example of fundamentals over technology. Now let me say this before I jump into the next example here. I'm a big fan of technology. For youth sports, I like sharing with players the occasional video of them having success, or to look at maybe a flaw that they might not be feeling kinesthetically that well. I'm a fan of showing them some video. I'm a fan of showing them video of great players and great plays. I'm a fan of using technology for competitions. But I'll tell you what, the best technology a coach can use at a youth baseball practice, outside of those of you fortunate enough to be able to afford or have access to a good pitching machine, is a stopwatch. So I think it's important for youth coaches. We got to be careful chasing the shiny object, that being technology. It definitely has some benefits for those high schools with a lot of money, and college programs, of course, and pro organizations. That's a whole different ballgame. They can be all teched up. But I think as a youth coach, I wouldn't chase technology too much, and I'd chase those opportunities to get your player, your players, your team, a bunch of high quality game-like reps. I thought it was well said. The technology is fine, but any successful team has to do the basic stuff well. The common denominator is not technology, especially at the youth level. The common denominator is being really good with the fundamentals, fielding the ground balls and making the outs, catching the fly balls, running the bases with calculated aggressiveness. And examples can go on, but you get the idea. So we shouldn't run away from technology, but we shouldn't chase it. If it falls into our lap and we can incorporate it, great. But I wouldn't make it the centerpiece. All right, in this last segment of this podcast, I want to share with you a strategy, a tip that can help you more efficiently and more effectively coach up your player, your players, your team. This coaching method is to be done during the game, during games, throughout the season, but definitely heavy early on. And so as coaches, we don't want to micromanage the game, and we don't want to be hovering over the umpire's every call. But rather, we should be utilizing that extra energy, that extra attention that we have to better coach up the players while they're in the dugout. So you have your players that are on the field. Obviously on defense, you have your 9 players out there, but you'll very likely have at least 1 to 3 or 4 kids in your dugout the entire time you're on defense. And I would have those kids sit close to me, or I would position myself close enough to them where I can still see the game, even if you're on the outside of the dugout, but close enough to them where I can have a conversation with them about the game as it unfolds, about certain plays, about certain situations. So we're having a discussion with our bench players. We're pointing out key moments or key things that are going on. We're pointing out things that we've discussed in practice the week before or the weeks prior. Pointing out things as they unfold in real time. We're discussing those with the players on the bench. Because those players on the bench don't have to be into the game in terms of knowing where to go with the ball, being ready for a hot shot coming their way, or making the next pitch. Of course, the players on the bench are simply just observing the game, and that's a great time to coach them up on the nuances of the game, understanding the game, and playing the game the right way. This can also be done while your team is on offense. On offense, you're likely going to have more than half your team, if not the vast majority of your players, in the dugout when you're on offense. The players are in a good position mentally and with their focus to be coached up. So when we see things unfold on the field, that is a great time to immediately coach it up with those players in the dugout. And ideally, you can connect it with things you've been coaching up in practice. So now they get a visual, or should I say they just saw a visual of what you're talking about or what you've been discussing in practice. Now they have a visual fresh in their mind to illustrate clearly what it is you would like to see them do, or something you'd like to see them avoid if it's a mistake that's made out there on the field. Not only is this an efficient way to effectively coach up how to play the game the right way with your players, with your team, it also will make the game more interesting because they'll know more about what's going on. Inherently, the more we know about something, the more interest we're likely going to have. Now, of course, players are all coming from different levels of understanding the game. Some have been watching baseball since they were 3. Some, this might be their first year, so it's going to impact them differently, of course. But it's likely to increase their interest in the game the more they know about the game. It'll also get them thinking about the game more. It'll help them increase their focus on the game by pointing out these things that are going on. It kind of goes back to, I didn't notice it until somebody pointed it out. Right? We hear that in life a lot. I never noticed it until somebody pointed it out. When we point these things out that are happening right there on the field in real time, that's a fresh visual of what we're coaching up. And that can go a long ways to increasing and speeding up our teams and our players' knowledge about the game and what to do when they're out there. We could also ask questions that help encourage our players to stay focused on the game. It could be as simple as, what plan is the hitter in right now? And that means whoever you asked, you could say, hey, Johnny, what plan is Joey in right now? They should be able to say plan A or plan 2 right away because they know the count. They've been paying attention. So this has a lot of benefits. It also keeps us coaches away from hyper-focusing on the umpires, on the things out of our control. It also keeps us from micromanaging the game and those players that are out there on the field that already have a lot on their minds. I believe the group we should be coaching up the most during the games are those players that are in the dugout, not on the field. The players in the dugout have very little that they need to have on their minds in terms of knowing where to go with the ball, what pitch they're looking for, what pitch to throw. They're sitting in the dugout. Most of them don't even have their bat in their hand or their glove in their hands. So let's take this time to take these observers and turn them into learners. So this strategy is a win-win-win. It's a win all around. Highly recommend doing this whenever possible. As a coaching staff, I'd make sure that you don't coach up a bunch of random stuff, things that you haven't talked about. I wouldn't point out a bunch of new stuff. I'm not saying you shouldn't point out new things. I definitely would encourage you to point out things that may have not been discussed at practice or talked about with the team yet. Just be careful how much you pile on because more is not always more, but it's definitely a good time to teach the game to our players sitting there on the bench, standing there in the dugout, watching the game unfold in front of them. All right, that's going to wrap it up for this week. It would be awesome to give back to this podcast. Simply leave a review or share the podcast with a friend. And also shoot me your emails. Keep me posted on your coaching journey. I love hearing from all of you. Always pumps me up. Coach Bo at 8020baseball.com, or you can go through the contact page on the website, 8020baseball.com. Next week, I'm going to share with you a tip that I came across from another coach, and I'll give this coach a shout out next week. In addition to our hitting drills, that can help our players make better swing decisions faster. So a specific tip that you can do, a specific thing you can do with your hitting drills, we'll talk about that next week. And also next week, I have a really good 4-part breakdown of batting slumps. So we'll break down the 4 parts to a hitting slump, a batting slump next week. And until then, let's all take care of our health so we can be there for our families, our close friends, and be there for our players and our teams. Let's take this information and let's go out there like a hitter with 2 strikes. Let's put it into play. All right, everyone, take care. And until next week, adios.
This has been the 80-20 Baseball Masterclass. Take it to the field.